sacred mosaic of landscapes, cultures, and fulfilled promises. From the land of Israel, cradle of patriarchs, prophets, and the Messiah, to majestic Lebanon. In Jordan, its desert cities whisper the echoes of lost kingdoms like Edom and Moab. Arabia, with its immense silence, guards Mount Sinai. In Egypt, the Nile flows like an artery of empires among pyramids that witnessed the people of God depart toward freedom. Turkey preserves the 7 churches of the Apocalypse. In ancient Greece, Paul proclaimed to the unknown God, and in Rome, the martyrs ignited the flame of the gospel with their blood. Let's explore together and discover some of the most interesting and extraordinary facts about the land of the Bible. Israel is the country of the Bible in which it is mentioned more than 2,500 times, evidencing its centrality in the biblical narrative. Its origin dates back to Abraham when God called him to leave his land to form a new nation. The name Israel comes from Jacob, grandson of Abraham, after his encounter with God, being called thus his descendants. The land of Israel was promised by God to Abraham and his descendants as a perpetual inheritance, establishing a spiritual and physical bond between the Jewish people and this region. For centuries, the Israelites inhabited this land, building their temple in Jerusalem as a center of worship. After disobedience to God, the people suffered exile. However, a remnant returned to rebuild Jerusalem. It was also in Israel where Christianity was born with the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, who was Jewish, an Israelite of the lineage of David. The first followers of Christ were all Israelites, and from Jerusalem the Christian message spread to the world. The Bible also mentions in Revelation the 144,000 sealed from the tribes of Israel, representing the final fulfillment of the divine promises for Israel. Today, Israel preserves important biblical heritage sites: the Western Wall, the last vestige of the Temple, the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus performed several miracles, Bethlehem, his birthplace, Nazareth, where he grew up, and Jerusalem, a holy city for 3 religions. These sites connect the present with biblical history, witnessing the continuous presence of the people of Israel in their ancestral land. Italy, the heart of an empire, at the heart of the ancient world, where Roman roads wove empires together and Caesars dictated the fate of nations, stands Italy, land of power, law, and prophetic redemption. From Rome, the city of 7 hills, rose the empire that ruled Judea and raised the cross upon which the Savior died. Yet what began as pagan dominion became fertile ground for the seed of the gospel. To this land came the Apostle Paul, chained, yet unstoppable, preaching in the courtyards of power and writing from prison epistles that would shake the centuries. In Rome, he found not an enemy's throne, but a pulpit, not defeat, but the echo that would carry faith to the ends of the earth. Italy, where emperors once persecuted believers, also witnessed martyrs crowned in glory. From the Colosseum to the catacombs, the Christian witness was etched in stone, in blood, and in fire. It was not merely the center of empires, but a hinge where worldly power met the authority of God, and was overcome. There, at the center of history, the cross raised its banner over the highest throne of man. Greece, ancient Javan. On the radiant shores of the Aegean Sea, among marble columns and hills, rises the land of Greece, known in the scriptures as Javan, son of Japheth, a name through which the prophets proclaimed the destiny of nations. According to the prophecy of Isaiah 66, Greece was called by the ancient prophecies, mentioned by Joel and Ezekiel as a people of trade and war, distant yet involved in God's designs. Though it was not the cradle of the patriarchs, the Bible views it as the setting for the clash between human wisdom and divine revelation. In its plazas and on the Areopagus resounded the words of Paul, who, according to Acts 17 in Athens, confronted Epicureans and Stoics with the message of the unknown God. Greece, heir to Alexander the Great, was the force that Hellenized the ancient world, paving the way for the gospel to spread in a common language. It was within this Hellenistic framework that the books of the New Testament were written and where the cities of Corinth, Thessalonica, and Philippi became beacons of the emerging Christianity. Turkey, the ancient Asia Minor. In the vast lands of what is now Turkey, where east and west embrace across mountains and seas, unfolded one of the most sacred and decisive stages of the biblical narrative, once known as Asia Minor. This region was home to patriarchs, prophets, apostles, and 7 churches ignited by the fire of the Spirit. Here stood Ephesus, where Paul preached with power and where the word of the Lord grew strong, triumphing over magic and idolatry. In Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Derbe, and Lystra, the gospel broke through borders and challenged empires. It was also in the other Antioch of Syria, now near the border between Turkey and Syria, where the disciples were first called Christians, and from where great missions to the world were launched. In the book of Revelation, 7 churches shine across these lands: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. To each were given warnings and promises, sealing Asia Minor as a land of revelation. Turkey was a cradle of apostolic witness, of the pain of martyrdom, and of future glory. In its ruins, the voice that walked among the lampstands still echoes. This is not merely a modern nation. It is a sanctuary of redemptive history. Modern Jordan occupies territories with deep biblical significance, home to ancient kingdoms frequently mentioned in the scriptures. The Ammonites and Moabites, descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew, established powerful kingdoms in this region. Amman, the current Jordanian capital, was known as Rabbah, the ancient capital of the Ammonites. It is mentioned in numerous biblical passages, especially during the wars with King David. In southern Jordan lived the Edomites, descendants of Esau, brother of Jacob. This people established their kingdom in the reddish desert lands, currently known as Wadi Rum. The Edomites had great influence, even infiltrating the throne of Israel. Herod the Great, who ruled when Jesus was born, was of Idumean Edomite descent, representing the fulfillment of ancient tensions between these peoples. Jordan was also the scene of important biblical events in Gadara, now Cays. Jesus performed the miracle of casting demons into a herd of pigs. John the Baptist was beheaded at the fortress of Machaerus, and it is believed that Jesus' baptism occurred in Bethany beyond the Jordan. These ancient peoples, along with others like the Nabateans, evolved through the centuries under different dominions until forming the modern nation of Jordan, established in 1946 after the British Mandate, uniting this rich biblical heritage with the current Jordanian national identity. Lebanon holds a prominent place in biblical narratives as a land of extraordinary natural and cultural wealth. Its famous cedars, mentioned more than 70 times in the Bible, were essential for the construction of Solomon's temple and the royal palace in Jerusalem. King Hiram of Tyre, an ally of Kings David and Solomon, provided these valuable cedars and skilled artisans, establishing a commercial relationship that brought prosperity to both kingdoms. The ancient Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon, located on the Lebanese coast, were important commercial and cultural centers. The Phoenicians, heirs of Canaanite culture, stood out as skilled navigators and traders, establishing colonies throughout the Mediterranean. Their mastery of the purple dye trade, a luxurious dye extracted from sea mollusks, granted them immense wealth and prestige. The Phoenician alphabetic script became the basis for many later writing systems. Lebanon's natural beauty also echoes in biblical poetry. The majestic Lebanon and anti-Lebanon mountain ranges, with their snow-capped peaks, are referred to as symbols of beauty and greatness. Mount Hermon, in the anti-Lebanon range, is mentioned in the Psalms and other texts as a place of blessing and abundance. Jesus' ministry also extended to this region. The Gospels recount how he traveled to the territories of Tyre and Sidon, where he performed healing miracles, including for the daughter of a Syrophoenician woman, showing that his message of salvation was for all nations, not just for Israel. Armenia holds a privileged place in biblical narratives as the land of Noah. According to the book of Genesis, after the Great Flood, Noah's Ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, located in what is now modern-day Armenia. This majestic mountain, with its snow-capped peaks, remains both a national and spiritual symbol for the Armenian people, who regard this event as the origin of their civilization. The Bible also mentions that it was in these lands where Noah planted the first vineyard after the flood, thus beginning the cultivation of grapes in human history. This winemaking tradition has endured in Armenia, which proudly holds some of the oldest viticultural techniques in the world. Armenia stands out as the first nation to officially adopt Christianity as its state religion, a groundbreaking moment that took place in the year 301 AD. This conversion happened when St. Gregory the Illuminator healed King Tiridates III of an illness, leading to the king's conversion. The monarch then declared Christianity the official religion, making Armenia a national pioneer of the Christian faith, decades before Constantine's Edict of Milan. The Armenians began early pilgrimages to Jerusalem, eventually establishing an Armenian quarter there, which remains to this day as one of the 4 historic quarters of the Old City. This enduring presence bears witness to the deep ties between Armenia and the Holy Land. Armenia's Christian legacy is reflected in its extraordinary religious architecture. Monasteries carved into mountains, churches adorned with distinctive stone crosses known as kochkars, and illuminated manuscripts that form a cultural treasure beyond compare, proclaiming the ancient and rich spiritual heritage of this nation. The land of the Nile, Egypt, and Sudan. Egypt, in Hebrew Mitzrayim, which means narrowness, and Cush, which means black, emerge as giants of the sacred landscape carved by the unbreakable current of the Nile, river of life and judgment, silent witness to covenants, rebellions, and redemptions. Egypt, fertile and proud, was a refuge for Abraham. There, Joseph was sold as a slave and rose to the throne. It was where the people of Israel settled in the land of Goshen, on the banks of the Nile, and years later served as a prison for a people crying out for freedom. From its golden palaces and towering temples rose Moses, bearer of a divine flame that parted the waters of the Red Sea and broke the scepter of the pharaohs. Centuries later, Egypt became a refuge again, this time for Joseph, Mary, and Jesus when fleeing from Herod. Further south, in the dark lands of Cush, the biblical Sudan, along the Nile Valley, which included the south of present-day Egypt and extended through the north of present-day Sudan, kings of towering stature and bronze skin rode with power. From there came Taraka, warrior pharaoh, to challenge the impious Assyrian Empire. His first mention is found in the book of Genesis, where the Gin River encircled the land of Cush, in a context linked to Eden. In the book of Numbers, it is mentioned that Moses took a Cushite woman as his wife. Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia. In the ancient plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the land was watered by the waters of Eden, rises what we know today as Iraq, cradle of empires, origin of languages, and setting of the first covenants with God. Here flourished Babylon, the city of hanging gardens and towers that challenged the sky. A symbol of human power and excessive pride, it was in this land where the Tower of Babel was erected and where God confused the languages to stop the arrogance of men. Ur of the Chaldeans, birthplace of Abraham, marks the beginning of the divine call toward a promised land. From these lands, the patriarch departed, leaving behind the splendor of Mesopotamian civilization to follow the invisible voice of the Most High. Later, Nineveh, capital of Assyria, would become an object of divine mercy when, at the preaching of Jonah, the entire city repented. Iraq was not only the cradle of kings and conquerors, but also of prophets, exiles, and revelations. In Babylon, Ezekiel and Daniel prophesied the end of times and defied lions and men for their faith. Iran, land of kings and empires. In the majestic heights of the mountains of Elam and in the fertile valleys of the ancient Persian Empire stretches the land we now call Iran, but which the Bible honors as Persia, bastion of empires and arm of redemption in sacred history. From this land arose kings who not only ruled kingdoms, but also fulfilled the will of God. Among them shines Cyrus the Great, anointed by the Most High, according to the prophecy of Isaiah 45, liberator of the people of Israel and restorer of Jerusalem. Iran, then, is not only land of ancient conquerors, but a crucial actor in the divine plan. Its kings, its cities, and its history are interwoven in the sacred scrolls as instruments of the Most High. It was Persia that dethroned Babylon and opened the doors for the return from exile. Esther, the Jewish queen who saved her people from the throne of Susa, lived under the rule of a Persian empire that extended from India to Ethiopia. Daniel, in his final days, served before the Medes and Persian kings, while his visions revealed the end of times. Macedonia, the land of Alexander. In the mountainous lands of the northern Aegean, where winds blow from Thrace and roads cross toward Rome, rises ancient Macedonia, land of warrior kings and divine revelations. Here was born Alexander the Great, the Lion of Europe, whose empire spread the Greek language and culture to the ends of the known world, preparing the way for the gospel. But greater than his conquests was the vision that changed spiritual history. In Troas, the Apostle Paul saw the Macedonian man pleading, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." Thus, Macedonia became the first European land to receive the light of Christ. There was Philippi, where Lydia believed by the riverside and became the first Christian in those lands, and Thessalonica, a city of commerce and power, where a fervent and persecuted church was born. Through these cities, Macedonia became a seed of the kingdom in the West. It was not just a land of empires, but of hearts made ready. In Macedonia, the sword of Alexander gave way to the word of the Spirit. Its hills and Roman roads bore witness to the clash between earthly power and the glory of the gospel. Macedonia, then, is not just history, it is promise, gateway, and bridge between two worlds. The Bible mentions Spain indirectly, referring to this land as one of the most remote ends of the known world. In biblical times, the Iberian Peninsula represented the westernmost edge of the Mediterranean, literally seen as the end of the world by the civilizations of the ancient Near East. The biblical account of Jonah describes how the prophet, attempting to flee from the mission God had given him in Nineveh, sought to sail to Tarshish. Many biblical scholars and archaeologists identify this Tarshish with the Phoenician colony located in what is now Cadiz, Spain, one of the westernmost ports of the ancient world. This city, founded around 1104 BC, was considered the furthest known point of Mediterranean navigation, symbolizing for Jonah the greatest possible distance from the divine will. The New Testament also mentions the Apostle Paul's intention to travel to Spain. In his letter to the Romans, Paul writes, "When I go to Spain, I hope to see you while passing through," revealing his desire to bring the gospel to the farthest corners of the known world. Although the Bible does not confirm whether he ever made this journey, there are ecclesiastical traditions and some archaeological evidence, particularly in Tarragona, ancient Tarraco, capital of Roman Hispania Tarraconensis, that suggest Paul may have reached the peninsula. This connection between Spain and biblical narratives reflects how the Iberian Peninsula symbolized, both literally and spiritually, the ends of the earth, where the divine message was also destined to arrive, completing the universal mission of Christianity. The islands of the Mediterranean, Malta and Cyprus. Amid the Mediterranean, where the waves whisper tales of shipwrecks and redemption, rise Malta and Cyprus, sacred islands marked by apostolic journeys and the flame of the emerging gospel. Cyprus, homeland of Barnabas, companion of Paul, was among the first lands to embrace the Christian faith. There, in Salamis and Paphos, the apostles preached with power, confronting sorcerers and governors, as recorded in Acts 13. On this island, the word of God triumphed over darkness, and the proconsul Sergius Paulus believed, witness to a gospel that disarmed empires. Further west lies Malta, the pearl of shipwrecks. It became a place of miracles when Paul, en route to Rome as a prisoner, was cast upon its shores by a relentless storm. In chapters 27 and 28 of Acts, we read how, through rain and fire, Paul was bitten by a serpent and did not die, leaving the islanders in awe. In the house of Publius, the island's chief official, he healed the sick and proclaimed the truth with heavenly authority. Both islands, small on the maps of the world, were immense in God's plan. Dalmatia, a coastal region along the Adriatic Sea, currently encompassing territories of Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro, appears briefly but significantly in the New Testament. In his second letter to Timothy, the Apostle Paul specifically mentions that he sent Titus to Dalmatia, 2 Timothy 4 verse 10, evidencing the expansion of Christianity into the Balkans during the 1st century. This biblical reference demonstrates the reach of the apostolic mission, which sought to establish Christian communities at the edges of the Roman Empire. Titus, one of Paul's most trusted collaborators, was sent to this Roman province to continue the evangelizing work, planting the first seeds of Christianity in the Adriatic region. Christianity in Dalmatia flourished over the following centuries, surviving Roman persecutions and leaving a rich architectural legacy. The Palace of Diocletian in Split, ironically built by an emperor who persecuted Christians, was later transformed into a Christian cathedral. During the Byzantine period, Dalmatia became an important religious center, developing a unique architectural style that blended Roman and Eastern elements. Despite barbarian invasions and later Ottoman influence, the Christian faith endured in the region, manifesting in churches, monasteries, and a rich cultural tradition that remains a fundamental part of Dalmatian identity to this day. The Desert of Arabia. In the vast deserts of Arabia, land of caravans and nomadic kings, the ancient kingdoms of Dedan, Tema, and Kedar flourished, where the sons of Ishmael lived under skies that knew their destiny. The Bible mentions Arabia as the source of incense, gold, and myrrh, treasures later offered to the newborn Messiah. The prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, spoke of judgment upon Arabia, highlighting the tents of Kedar and the oases of Tema that would give water to fugitives. But they also prophesied its redemption when the desert tribes would worship the Holy One of Israel. Arabia, more than a landscape, was a stage of revelations and signs. In the arid desert of Midian, Moses had his encounter with God in the burning bush, where he heard the voice that would call him to free his people. In this desert, Mount Sinai rises as an eternal witness of that divine encounter. Arabia was also a refuge for the Apostle Paul, who, after his conversion on the road to Damascus, withdrew there to receive revelation. Thus, Arabia was not only a crucible of trade and wisdom, but also the land where wandering patriarchs and prophets lived and received visions that united the destinies of peoples and the eternal kingdom of God. The biblical South, Yemen and Ethiopia. At the edges of the biblical South, where incense perfumes the mountains and the oases whisper secrets to the desert, rose the legendary kingdom of Sheba, a mystical bridge between Africa and Arabia. Its capital, Marib, shone under the Yemeni sun like a jewel of the ancient world, surrounded by palaces, gardens, and temples. From that golden throne reigned a woman without equal, the Queen of Sheba, wise, proud, and beautiful, mistress of caravans that crossed the desert with gold, myrrh, and precious stones. Having heard of the splendor and wisdom of Solomon, king of Israel, she undertook a monumental journey through dunes, mountains, and the Red Sea. In Jerusalem, royalty and wisdom met, oracle and queen in a duel of riddles. With every word from Solomon, the queen was amazed. Before his God, she bowed her heart. She was not only seeking answers, she was seeking the eternal. The legend crossed the sea to Ethiopia, where her lineage, according to the Keber Nagast, became a sacred crown. Cush, land of men with skin like ebony, was already witness to divine covenants. Both peoples, bound by trade, faith, and blood, are carved into the divine narrative. Ethiopia gave a faithful heart to the gospel. In Acts 8, the Ethiopian eunuch is minister to Queen Candace, showing the continuity of a female royal lineage in Ethiopia. Gaza, frequently mentioned in biblical texts, is part of the territories promised by God to Abraham and his descendants. This coastal region experienced numerous changes in sovereignty throughout biblical history, oscillating between Hebrew control and the rule of other peoples, primarily the Philistines. The Philistines arrived on the coasts of Canaan around the 12th century before Christ, probably from the Aegean region. Many scholars suggest they came from Crete and may be related to the Minoan civilization. These sea peoples established a pentapolis on the southwestern coast of Canaan, which included Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. Their presence generated constant conflicts with the Israelites, as demonstrated by the stories of Samson in Gaza and the clashes with King David. It is important to note that the modern term Palestinian derives from the Philistine name, but there is no historical or cultural continuity between the ancient Philistines and the contemporary Arab inhabitants of the region. The Philistines as a people ceased to exist after the Assyrian and Babylonian conquests, absorbed by other cultures. The name Palestine was imposed by the Romans after the suppression of the Jewish revolt in 135 AD. Emperor Hadrian, seeking to erase the Jewish connection to the land, renamed the province of Judea as Syria Palestina, based on Israel's ancient enemies. This administrative name endured through various empires and became the geographic designation of the region for centuries, although the historical and spiritual bond of the Jews with this land never faded. Although India is not mentioned directly by its modern name in the scriptures, many biblical scholars identify references to it under the name of Jodu, in Hebrew, in the Book of Esther, which describes the vast Persian Empire from India to Ethiopia. This reference shows that the Indian subcontinent was already known as an eastern boundary of the world in biblical times. The relationship between the biblical world and India developed mainly through trade. The trade routes crossing the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea brought precious spices, jewels, ivory, and fine fabrics mentioned in several biblical passages. Products such as cinnamon, nard, and precious stones mentioned in the construction of Solomon's temple very likely came from trade with India. According to ancient Christian traditions, the Apostle Thomas would have traveled to India around the year 52 AD, bringing the Christian message to the subcontinent. The Christian communities of Kerala, known as the Christians of St. Thomas, trace their origins to this apostolic mission, representing one of the oldest Christian traditions outside the Mediterranean. China, as a specific entity, does not appear named in biblical texts, but many scholars have identified possible indirect references. The term Zionim, mentioned in Isaiah 49 verse 12, "Behold, these shall come from afar, and lo, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Zionim," has been interpreted by some scholars as a reference to China, representing the easternmost lands known to the Hebrew world, the ancient Chinese civilization. It was already a cultural and political power during biblical times. Although direct contact with the Mediterranean world was limited, the famous Silk Road, which connected China with the West, began to operate regularly during the Han Dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, facilitating a cultural and commercial exchange that would deeply influence both civilizations. The Scythians, a nomadic people who dominated the vast Eurasian steppes from the northern shores of the Black Sea to the borders of China, appear in the Bible as a symbol of the barbaric edges of the known world. These skilled horsemen, expert archers, and masters of gold work were regarded by Mediterranean civilizations as the personification of ferocity and savagery. In the Old Testament, the prophet Jeremiah mentions them as part of the northern peoples whom God would use as instruments of judgment. Their reputation as fearsome warriors made them the perfect metaphor for an unstoppable threat. Jewish tradition, particularly in later rabbinical texts, identifies the Scythians as descendants of Gog and Magog, figures mentioned in the prophecies of Ezekiel. In the New Testament, Paul refers to them in his letter to the Colossians 3 verse 11. In a radically different context, there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. This revolutionary passage proclaims that even those considered the wildest and most distant from civilization, the Scythians, are equally welcomed into the family of God through Christ. Today, scholars consider that modern Eastern Slavic peoples, such as Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians, inhabit territories once dominated by the Scythians, although no direct ethnic or cultural continuity exists. These ancient nomads left their mark on the region through impressive archaeological artifacts and the historical memory of the civilizations that later emerged in these lands. Syria represents in the biblical pages a fascinating fusion of ancient peoples, with the Arameans being its most prominent component. The Aramean connection is so deep that the Bible occasionally refers to the Hebrew patriarchs as Arameans. Deuteronomy describes Jacob as a wandering Aramean about to perish, evidencing the ancient ties between these cultures. Biblical history recounts numerous conflicts between the Aramean kingdoms of Syria and Israel. King David extended his dominion to conquer ancient Damascus, a city that already had thousands of years of history. This conquest marked the beginning of a significant Jewish presence in Damascus, where one of the first synagogues outside of Israel was established. Over time, it became an important center of Sephardic Judaism that endured for generations. It was precisely to this Jewish community in Damascus that Saul of Tarsus was heading, a zealous persecutor of the early Christians. The biblical account describes how, on the road to Damascus, Saul had a supernatural encounter with a blinding light and the voice of Jesus, which radically transformed his life. This event changed the course of history, turning the persecutor into Paul, the apostle who would bring Christianity to the Gentile world. Damascus and other Syrian cities continued to be important centers of faith, where Jewish, Christian, and later Muslim traditions intertwined, creating the rich cultural fabric that characterizes modern Syria, heir to these ancient Aramean legacies and its crucial role in the development of the Abrahamic religions.